it's always good to start a presentation with an apology. And I apologise for the title of our presentation today. You've seen it on your programmes, you might have seen it in the build-up. It's quite waffly, isn't it? And I think that's because of the result of what we've tried to do and what I hope you'll enjoy across the next 20 minutes, which is 2 separate research projects jammed into one presentation. So we've got 56 slides to get through in about 20 minutes. And if we're already running behind, that's great news for me. So there's a lot of information, and I'll try and be as informative but as brisk as possible. So let's get this car crash rolling. So what we're talking about today, we're talking about candidate attraction, your brand, your people, and how both will help you hire. Here are some people. Maybe you want to hire them, maybe you don't. This is supposed to be a slide as an icebreaker in regards to these are people that maybe you want to hire, maybe you don't. But it's supposed to be a representation of what candidates might be like today in terms of perhaps it's a younger audience, perhaps it's a tech-savvy audience, perhaps it's one that's glued to its phone. So there are no shortage to the amount of challenges that we all face when we're looking to hire the staff that we need. But what I'm going to be talking about today specifically are 2 areas around candidate attraction. And if I was going to break it down into those 2, first we're going to be talking about building an employer brand, which is the first research project we ran about midway through this year. And then the second half of the presentation is all going to be around encouraging employee referral. I know that the presentation after this is all around that. So hopefully I'm setting up a good story for the next person to come and knock it out of the park. So I'll start with this quote from Jeff Bezos from Amazon, which is, "Your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room," which I think is a great quote and it kind of sets us up for employer brand. Because in this instance, he's talking about his brand in regards to his customers, but I think this quote holds true for our employer brands. I think more frequently, you'll have all been familiar with this idea of employer brands talked about loads. There's loads of column inches given to it in recruitment media, and certainly there's no shortage to presentations, much similar to what you might see today, that talk all around employer brand. What we wanted to do is come up with an idea of what candidates and what the talent that you're targeting expects from your employer brand, what they respond to and what they don't. So just kind of give you a kind of a guideline in terms of the candidate expectations. I think more often than not, we can kind of get wrapped up into this, and Read.co.uk have been guilty of this too, in regards to us thinking very internally about how we want to build our employer brand without actually asking and engaging with our audience. So this first set of results, the first set of big percentages, if you've seen a Read.co.uk presentation before, you'll be familiar with the fact we love sticking big percentages on the screen, is taken from 2,000 UK workers. So these are people that are looking for jobs, these are people that are passive candidates too, all in regards to their expectations around what they expect from the ideal employer brand. There's one question that we ask, which is always around who's your dream employer? Who do you really want to work for? And it serves quite nicely to kind of tack on the end of our presentations usually as what we like to loosely dub a bit of fun. I think, again, talking about it being very internal, I think that's just us thinking it was. And I don't think there's any service to me sticking a bunch of big brands up there, because these are the brands that are most responded to, and we did ask that question as part of the survey, but it was all the big tech giants who have deep pockets. And it's all very well and good putting them on a screen and telling you what's great about their brands, but perhaps not all of us in the room have £1 million budgets to spend on employer brands. So what we wanted to do instead was drill into the heart of why people picked these brands as the ideal ones they work for, because more often than not, the question around who's your dream employer is all about brand recognition and brand recall, and perhaps not all of us have that product. Certainly we don't have it necessarily at read.co.uk, where you're going to be using it every day. So the brands that come out top are the ones that you can all imagine: Google, Apple, Microsoft, these kind of brands that we all use regularly, and that's the kind of the first thing that you'll say, but there's nothing to that. So what we have, hopefully, is a little bit more insightful. The question we want to ask over and above who is it that you want to work for is why. Why do you choose that dream employer? And the answer that was most frequently given to us was the fact that it's a brand that you'd be proud to work for, which was quite interesting for us, and it's quite an emotive reasoning. And if there's an action point for us all to take away from that particular insight, it's perhaps that we need to better articulate the pride, what it means to us to work for our organisation, and more often than not, it's about what we're doing and how we service our customers. So what we're doing that makes a difference, whether it be, again, for our customers or perhaps in the outer world as well. There's a lot of corporate social responsibility work that we'll all be doing, and perhaps we should put that front and centre of our employer brand. But essentially, when talent is looking for who to work for. They just want to work for someone who they're proud to work for. And it's all about making a difference. 46% of our survey respondents, that's 2,000 odd individuals, said they'd be more likely to use a brand that they use regularly. Again, that's what we've already touched upon. And 45% said that they would be more likely to work for a brand they've had a personal experience with. So there's an action point to take away. It might be that we need to speak to our marketing teams, because what we might not realise is that our customer set is a talent pool in itself, and there might be ways we can engage with individuals who are our customers already that might want to work with us. If they've received an outstanding experience, they're more likely to work for you. So you might have a talent pool that perhaps you were not previously aware of. So hopefully a nice takeaway for you there. That has not come out well, has it? It comes out well there, not so much there. Don't worry, we'll be sharing the slides with you guys afterwards. So the second biggest factor in terms of why do we pick a dream employer is having a reputation for success. And it stands to reason that it'd be a company that offers generous pay and benefits. And if you want to round out that top 5, it's a market-leading brand, which again, it's great if you have it. If not, not to worry. And a company that's known for a fun social environment. So these are all the big expectations, or this is what talent has told us that they imagine from their dream employer. A question that we asked, and I think it's a really pertinent one, because it's, again, we've already touched upon this. It's great if you work for an Apple or a Google and you have this big name and kind of most of your job's done already for you. But is it intrinsic to work for a brand that is recognised? And the answer that we got is very much, it's not that important to candidates, and rightly so. So 28% of our 2,000 odd respondents said it was very important. 38% said somewhat, and 26% said not very. So the majority of people are not that fussed about it being a recognised brand. It comes back to that whole point of, ultimately, we just want to work for someone that we're proud to work for, and we want to, what we're doing, we want to feel like makes a difference to our company and to our customers as well. So UK workers associate well-known brands with history and heritage, with job security, ultimately. And that was a result that came through directly from our survey. Because we wanted to ask, what's the benefit to working for a recognised brand? And ultimately, it came back to this. And I think that's a really important takeaway from today, because ultimately, there's many ways we can express how you can have job security, and there are many ways we can express being a successful company. Perhaps you've won awards that might not be well known to a huge market of consumers, but if you have won awards, you should put that as part of your brand communications, because it all comes back to this point around job security. The reason people respond to brands they recognise is because they have that, they feel there's security in that, in terms of it's a recognised brand, it's a company known for success, and there's many ways we can articulate that. So there's an action point that you can barely see on the screen. It should be that we should share our successes and also talk about your business performance. If you're hitting your targets, if you're experiencing exponential growth, that is something you should include as part of your communications. I think more often than not, perhaps we can feel that that's too much of a pat on the back, and we're almost too humble as recruiters, where we should be talking about that success because it links directly back to that point around, if you're expressing your success, you're talking directly to an individual's ability to see a security as part of joining your brand. So yeah, we should forget any preconceived notions or barriers around expressing that success. Would you prefer to work for a startup or a fast-growing organisation? I thought that was a really interesting question to ask individuals, because a lot of the brands that came out, the Googles, the Apples, all started off as tech startups, and they've still managed to, even though they've grown, they've multi-million-pound companies, they've still managed to, at their heart, be known for that kind of startup tech entrepreneurial brands. So how important is that to our survey audience? 1 in 4 individuals told us that they would prefer to work for a startup. And when we asked them what are the things that you associate a startup with, they told us that it was challenging, rewarding, high risk, faster skill development, and greater responsibility. And I think a lot of those areas might have been seen as challenges, whereas actually this is what this audience really responds to. So if you're in the room and you're a relatively new brand, you should embrace all these as part of your employer communications, because it's what 1/4 of our audience really responds to. And ultimately, I think these are the individuals that would be a best fit for your organisation. So don't shy away from all of these elements if you are a relatively new brand. Embrace them, because clearly the audience is telling us this is what they embrace around a startup culture. So there's an action. Embrace the challenging element as part of your employer comms, and also talk about the perks of a dynamic work environment. Because you're a relatively new and fresh brand, you're able to offer a lot more in terms of helping your staff is going to help you build that identity and that culture, and you should embrace that as part of your comms too. A final question that we asked, and we'll sum up the first half of this presentation, is do you feel engaged and happy at work? 64% of our audience said yes, 26% said no, but they weren't actively looking for work, and 10% said no, they're not engaged, and they are active job seekers, which is quite interesting if you think about it being 2,000 odd respondents. That's around 200 odd people. I don't know how solid my maths is there. Maths was never my strongest point. But that might very well be individuals that you yourselves are looking to target. And what's interesting, and the reason that we asked that is because we wanted to understand the correlation between not being engaged and a perspective on do you feel a part or do you feel a heavy link to your employer brand communications. And 74% of that 10%, I've lost myself, said that they feel their employer is not effective in communicating its EVP. So they feel directionless. They don't feel a part of the company culture. They don't understand necessarily what it is, what their purpose is. And that's quite an interesting link to make. So we then asked all of our survey respondents, what does effective EVP communication look like to you? What do you expect? And they told us quarterly communications. So if you've had a big campaign, if this is something you've invested a lot of money and time in recently, it's worth checking back in. It shouldn't just be a one-off thing. It should be something you check in on, not too frequently, but once a quarter is what the expectation from candidates is. And finally, annual reviews. So it isn't just something we should do once every year. It is something we should do once every year. We shouldn't just leave it, once every 5 years and leave it at that. It's something we should regularly review just to make sure that it's still resonating with our employees, because ultimately, if they're engaged, they're not going to want to be looking elsewhere. So that sums up the first half. I hope you've enjoyed it so far. We're now going to be talking about the power of personals. This is all around how we can make our own teams a big part of our attraction strategy. Another subtitle for that might be the case for employee advocacy. But we're going to start a little bit top line than that. So before we talk about recruitment specifically, it won't surprise any of us that we asked the question, are you more likely to purchase after a personal recommendation? So this is anything. This is not specific to recruitment. It won't surprise you to learn that 60% said a personal recommendation is more effective. You're more likely to buy if you've had that confidence that somebody else has referred you. And in terms of endorsements, when we make purchasing decisions, 55% said somebody that they know is the strongest endorsement they could have. 15% said if they've seen it advertised online, on TV, wherever, it's going to make a difference. And interestingly, 15% said a social influencer. Now, this is you'll have seen these individuals if you've got your socials. There are individuals now that are known solely for being social influencers. And it's interesting, they have just as much weight as advertising does, and you'll have seen that as part of any brand's advertising strategy. This is a picture of a squirrel trap. I'm going to pause for a second because that is a weird picture to show. And the reason I'm showing it is because when I was talking about this piece of research with my boss, we talked about the impact of recommendations. And he told me he was looking for a humane squirrel trap, which kind of shocked me a little bit. I was like, what he does in his own time is completely up to him. But what he essentially went on to tell me is that the reason he bought that particular humane squirrel trap is because he saw a really good recommendation for it online. And I guess if there's a point that I'm trying to crowbar into the presentation, it's that personal endorsement that we've seen that works so well in our purchasing decisions is now available and ready to us online. It's reflected as part of Amazon's purchasing. If you're going to make that purchasing decision, you're more likely to look at the reviews to make sure the product that you're looking for is suitable to your needs. And what better way to make that decision than looking at the reviews? So my boss was able to make his humane squirrel trap purchasing decision on the basis of, who's this individual here? Shazza. So thank you, Shazza, for helping my boss find his humane squirrel trap. But it's not just Amazon, it's everything. Every kind of online service that we know has some sort of a recommendation system, whether it be Amazon, we've already talked about. TripAdvisor, of course, it might be your first go-to when you're in a new location for the first time. Netflix has recommendations, it has reviews, it has a star rating. Their algorithms work in a way that it's able to understand what you've watched, what other people have enjoyed too, if you've seen the same things, and able to make those recommendations. And you can make that decision whether to invest your time in watching that program based upon the star rating system. There are many, many different things. Uber as well, of course, we're all familiar with. What's interesting about Uber is it's now become two-way. Not only are you able to see the star rating of your cabbie, you're able to get a star rating yourself and that impacts your ability to get picked up wherever. Please say 4.6 if you're interested as an Uber customer. Anyway, but what about work? How does this relate to recruitment specifically? So what is the biggest influence on our, and again, this was another, a different set of respondents, again, 2,000 odd respondents that all of this insight is taken from. So what is the biggest influence, on helping you decide whether or not to apply for a job? A personal referral is the biggest asset in terms of you're more likely to apply for a job if you've had that personal referral. Direct contact came out second. Seeing a job ad came out third, which wasn't great. Considering I work at a job board, I wasn't best pleased, but I said I'd give you the results kind of raw and as they were. And finally, agency contact came out kind of a bit away from certainly those top two. So what does this all mean? Again, this might not be groundbreaking stuff, but it's important to relay in that we trust first-hand accounts, whether it's part of our purchasing decision or part of influencing where it is that we decide to work. More so if you personally know the source. So yes, in terms of e-commerce, there is an ability to crowdsource reviews, but it makes the impact of it being personal is that much greater. And we respond to like-minded individuals. So individuals that we feel share similar interests, we're more likely to respond to. So what does this all mean? Well, it boils down to this, which is advocacy in action. And these are some examples of employee referrals in the workplace, or some statistics around it too. So on average, employees have social networks, and I think social networks are a big part of this because they're readily accessible, they're readily available, and they're a huge tool that perhaps we might not all in this room be using. But our employees have networks that are 10 times larger than your brand does. So if you can get people, your staff, bought into this, you're connecting with a huge audience that you might not be aware of. We then broke down, or we asked our audience to tell us how much they engage with social media and how frequently. I won't run through this sort of matrix in huge detail because we haven't got the time, but this will be shared afterwards. But it might give you an indication of how people engage and how frequently and what platforms you might choose to be on. We then asked individuals, have you ever shared work-related content across your social channels? And if so, which ones have you used? And it was interesting to us that Facebook comes out as the top and as the most kind of readily used, with not much differentiation between Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, which is quite surprising in regards to LinkedIn. And I think with LinkedIn, my gut feel with that is that people are quite close-guarded, and they maybe feel a sense of they're worried that if they share something that's a little bit too conversational, it might impact how they're seen professionally. Having said that, I think the best uses of LinkedIn, and we'll all be familiar with this, have been those that kind of veer into the more personal rather than professional. So perhaps if we run this survey again in a year's time, it would be interesting to see what statistics come back. We then asked our survey respondents, when was the last time you liked, shared, or commented on your organisation's social posts? And you can see here from this matrix, it's not really that frequently, and particularly if you look at the far right-hand side of the screen there, 42% said they've never engaged or interacted with their organisation's social posts. Now, what's interesting is when you flip that over to how about a colleague's post about work, you'll see those numbers increase. In some instances, quite a lot. In some instances, maybe not so much. But that never thing on the right-hand side that you see there has gone from 42% down to 25%. So what does this all mean? It means that we're more likely to share and engage with individuals rather than organisations is the big takeaway. I should have just put that on the slide. That would have been much easier, wouldn't it? Employee shares have double the click-through rates of corporate shares is essentially what I'm getting at. That's the big takeaway. Sorry, somebody's taking a picture there. There we go, cool. Employee-generated content is 24% more frequently shared, according to MSL research too. So if you can get your people posting, they're more likely to be engaged with than necessarily your organisation is. So what does this all mean? Well, we share a lot, especially on Facebook. You'll have seen that by the breakdown and the matrix that I shared with you earlier. And we'll share other people's content in preference to our own, and particularly we'll share our employees over our organisation. We're more likely to be successful if senior people are involved. Now, that is an element to the research that we haven't presented a big statistic on, but they're more bought into it if they see people from MD level upwards, not upwards, you know what I mean. If they're bought in, then so will your staff. And if we identify our company's biggest social influencers, we can then empower them to curating and creating content. These are some examples from Reed that have been used, and perhaps they're not the best, but it'll give you an indication of what we might want to empower our own employees to do. This individual got their congratulations letter on working for 10 years and got a sabbatical and an invite to a dinner, and they've taken it upon themselves to post about that. And that's really powerful and more likely to get shares and recognition than Reed posting about it themselves. In this instance, these guys are all talking about an office day out. Again, there might be some ideas that you might want to run with post-session. And when we talk about the kind of top level downwards, this is James talking about, James Reed that is, I was saying at the conversation like we're best mates. He's talking about a topic that's really important to him, and he's sharing it, and it's more likely to get shared than if Reed posted about it because it's coming directly from him. And finally, this individual was talking around their charitable social efforts. I think one of the best examples of this, and you'll see in the background here a video of this, and what's really interesting is all the things that we've talked about so far have been sort of consumer-focused marketing, whereas this was employer brand-focused marketing. So this is a specific recruitment campaign that Reebok ran. So Reebok understood that because they're a sports and fitness brand, individuals that have an interest in sports and fitness are more likely to work for them. So as part of their kind of building up their employer profile, they created this video asset and they shared it online. And what was really interesting is not only did they take the time and investment to build this ad and build a whole set of creative behind it, they also were quite savvy in the way that they empowered their own staff to start talking about it and become referrals to come and join the company. And it was all based upon a hashtag, and I'm really pleased because I've always wanted to say ass in front of a large room of people. They used the hashtag #FitAssCompany, and it's all well and good having a big top-level campaign in terms of bringing people in, but it's how these guys empowered their own people to bring that campaign to life. And you can see instances here. So yes, the brand pushed it out as the message, and they kind of led the way. But there are examples of individuals that work for the organization using that hashtag and sharing their own stories to kind of pad it out and give it life. So in this instance, these guys did some burpees. They decided to post about it. This individual shared the fact that the Reebok campaign got coverage, shared it, and it had much more engagement than Reebok talking about it themselves. And similarly, this individual here did the same thing. So it's all well and good creating big candidate attraction campaigns, but if we can empower our own people to share it, it's going to give you better reach and it's going to give you far more engagement, and those individuals might very well be empowered to then come and work for you. So there's kind of hidden talent pools there. The final thing I want to talk about in regards to employee referrals is something that I think we all do online if we're all really honest with ourselves, and that's stalking. And that's the impact it has. And this is kind of, it brings weight to the fact that if you're able to get people posting about yourself, this is what individuals will see. So 42% of the individuals that we asked said they searched tag posts of their new employer before starting their job. So again, if you've got a wealth of information, if you're encouraging your individuals to start talking about your company, there's going to be more resources, there's going to be more touch points that they can find and surface and build a better picture of what it's like to work for you. 42% again said they searched colleagues' profiles before starting a job. I think perhaps we've all done that at some stage. And the biggest influencer, or the biggest influence, I should say, on helping you decide whether to apply or not are the following. I think these are really important. It's all about reading positive experiences online, reading positive reviews, positive posts shared on social, and positive media attention. So some of that we can control, some of it we can't, but where we're able to, we should be encouraging our people to talk positively about our brand. So what factors stop you? So we talked about what empowers you, what then has an impact on stopping individuals applying for your company. Negative reviews, again, that won't be a surprise to any of you. Posts that people don't agree with, negative posts, and poor media attention. It's just mirroring what we saw on the earlier slide, I guess. I talked a little bit about social influencers earlier on and the rise of social influencers, and I think there are some interesting points, and I think they can help, but what's interesting here is they're actually a detractor in terms of authenticity. So 25% of our audience said they don't trust social influencers. So half of us trust endorsements from employees rather than individuals who are bought in to talk about our brand. So if you're perhaps looking to get an individual that doesn't work for your organization in to talk positively, perhaps there's a lesson here around sincerity and authenticity in voice. So what does this all mean? Individuals are more likely to try before they buy. So anything that you're able to get your guys, your staff posting around will be seen, and if it's positive, it'll have a really big impact. Negative posts mean the opposite. It means people are less likely to apply. And finally, people are very cynical around how they see influencers. So they can be powerful in some instances, but just be wary of them when it comes to your employer brand. So if I'm going to break down the presentation into two halves, I've got 3 takeaways from the first half, which are brand recognition is not essential for attraction. I think that's really important, and I think I was really keen personally to push that as a point, because when we run the "What's your dream brand to work for?", it was never really fun, and there was nothing you could really learn or take away from that. But what was interesting when we asked more questions as to why people chose those brands, it was all because they're the brands that they are most familiar with. It didn't actually link back to why they chose them. Talk about your success. If there's one thing you take away from that first half, it should be around people want to work for a brand that they feel secure in. So you're able to talk about your business performance. If you've had an award-winning performance, it's all going to link back to how people perceive you as being successful and ultimately their job security. If you haven't got an EVP, prepare for disengaged talent, because individuals who said they weren't happy at work, so they felt less engaged with their brand's EVP. If I'm going to break down the second half, trust your people when it comes to employee referrals. Empower your own staff to talk about your brand. There's an element to that says you should let your social presence grow organically. I think Reebok did it well in that they started off, but they let their people take control and talk about it how they would amongst their networks. And if you can get senior people involved, you'll just further your campaigns that much further. So that's all I had. Thank you very much for listening. I've been asked to attach the following 2 questions as part of the roundtables, but I'd be happy to take any questions before we get cracking with that. Thank you all for listening.